So I'd like to introduce my very dear friend Tony Wrighton from the Zestology podcast, and author of about 350,000 books as well. Some very, very good ones. If you don't already listen to the Zestology podcast, you should. It's pretty good. Pretty good. I mean, it's pretty good. I mean, it's all right. Anyway, Tony.
Thanks very much indeed. I was hoping to sort of roam around a bit, but I think I'll stay behind the mic because it's so packed. And very honoured to be here on the 4th anniversary of the Biohacker meetup. I do remember that first meetup really well. Who was here on that first meetup? Great, okay, so we are described as OGs. I rather rashly agreed to carry my Juve light to the meetup. Turns out Juve lights aren't that heavy unless you carry them 2 miles up the road to a meetup. But it was good to have the infrared light. It was good to all get together, and I think the scene has come on so much since then, and certainly personally my life has as well. I was here with my now wife, we weren't married then and we didn't have a son then, and now this is our idea of a good date. You know, we've got a babysitter today, and I did have to break it to Faith that the rest of my team have COVID, so she would actually be selling my books. But how our lives have changed. And yeah, it's really great to be here. And today I want to talk a little bit about biohacking and also about NLP and the combination between the two. Last time, I think when I spoke on my 5 favourite biohacks. And I was looking over the things that I spoke about 4 years ago. And as with everything in biohacking, not everything works all of the time. I think I was speaking about L-tyrosine 4 years ago. Has anyone tried the L-tyrosine supplement? Yeah, it's great for mood and anxiety, and 4 years ago it was working very well for me. It turns out there's a very strange side effect to L-tyrosine, and that is, does anyone know what it is? It gives you a tan. And if you're prone to moles, like I am, you start growing a lot more moles very quickly. Absolutely no joke. I started to realise after 2 weeks of taking L-tyrosine, I'm going brown. And it was because of the L-tyrosine, so I stopped taking that one quite quickly. But anyway, today is hopefully an entertaining overview of Neuro-Linguistic Programming and how you can apply it to biohacking. We'll try a few of the sort of NLP 101 techniques. Has anyone heard of Neuro-Linguistic Programming before? Good, okay, lots of you have. It was invented in the 70s by Richard Bandler and John Grinder in California, just around the time when computers were becoming a big thing. And that's why it's got a very computery name to it, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And it's a study of how we do things well, of how to communicate better with yourselves and with other people as well. Because we tend to develop a lot of narratives that can hold us back. And when you start to change that narrative, when you start to change the way that it sounds in your head and the way that it sounds when you're talking to other people, you can start to make big changes in your life and optimize it. And I started studying in NLP 17 years ago. I've had sort of 2 careers concurrently. I've worked in radio and TV for 20 years, and I've always had the sort of the self-helpy wellness stuff going on the side. And most of the times my colleagues in radio and TV have thought I was that woo-woo bloke who was doing stuff on the side. And I suppose I probably am, trying L-tyrosine and that sort of thing. But in 2004, I was working as a radio presenter in Manchester, and I started to get into the neuro-linguistic programming, and I was just interested in it for myself, but I thought, you know what, I could start to try some of these techniques on my radio show. And I wasn't very good at it. So I was constantly worried that I would get found out, but I thought, well, when I start training in NLP, and I was on a 6-month course, I'll start using the linguistic part of NLP on my radio show, and I'll see if I can get a few more listeners and get people to listen for longer and maybe get them to feel better about listening as well. And there's a reason for telling you this story, because after a couple of months I got called into the boss's office, and it was after a radio show, a drive time show in Manchester, where I'd layered on the NLP techniques really quite thick. And as I say, I didn't really know what I was doing. And I thought he'd rumbled me, and he sat back in his chair and he put his feet up on the desk. He said, "Tony, I don't know what you've been doing." And he put his hands behind his head. I don't know what you've been doing, but your listening figures have gone through the roof. I thought, wow. And he said, yeah, because normally on radio stations, the drive time presenter has less listeners than the breakfast show. But on our station, I had gone above the breakfast show. The breakfast show presenter was furious about it. But you could say it's coincidence, but then for the next 3 years I had more listeners than the breakfast show, and I put that down to the Neuro-Linguistic Programming techniques that I was using. I can go through some of those. You're welcome to ask questions at any point if you want. You can sort of raise your hand. I'm happy for this to be a conversation of how can you use NLP and Neuro-Linguistic Programming? Well, I think it's very relevant to biohacking, because with biohacking, we're all fairly adventurous. We're all willing to try new stuff, but often we'll try that stuff and we don't really know if it's working or not. Well, NLP is, I think, best described as a study of what works. And so I think it's very well applied to biohacking. It's used a lot in therapy, in communication, in behavioral science. I use it with my 2-year-old and it works well. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, you can ask either or questions, to which the answer, he's very good at saying no, our son, isn't he? But when you ask him an either or question, would you like to brush your teeth or put your pajamas on? It's very hard to say no to that. He'll find a way normally. Well, unfortunately, he started to use NLP on me now, which is really disappointing. He's figured out that tonality is a really big thing with NLP. So we would say that around 55% of your communication is verbal, and then around 38% is tonal. And then the non-verbal bit is even more important. But he's worked out the whole tonal aspect of communication. So he's realised that a sentence that goes up at the end of a sentence is a question, and a sentence that goes down at the end of a sentence is a statement. So at the end of his bedtime, when it really should be time for him to go to bed, he could say, do you want to read another book? And that's a question. But what he actually says is, you want to read another book? Yeah, okay, another book. He gets it. So it's just quite satisfying to see my son going so well. After radio, I went on to sort of study in neuro-linguistic programming as to the highest level. So I did the practitioner course, the master practitioner, and the trainer training. And then wrote 3 books on NLP, and that's my 4th book, which very gratifyingly has almost sold out. So if you do want a copy of my book, When Life is a Bit Meh, You Need Energy, come quickly afterwards. And these other 2 books on histamine intolerance are published by my company. I can go into a little bit later on. In 2017, I went on the Bulletproof Radio podcast, Tim, and talked about biohacking and NLP, and that really sort of rocket charged my own podcast and my own following in terms of what I do on NLP and biohacking. And I think what it's worth us doing is just practicing a couple of these techniques. So let's start with cold exposure. Who here is into cold baths, ice baths, a cold shower at some point in the morning? I know Laura's got a fledgling cold exposure business, which I'm very excited about and signed up to your pre-order. Okay, so lots of hands going up there. Wim Hof has been a guest on my podcast as well. And when writing this book last year, in the depths of lockdown, I became really interested in the science behind cold exposure and whether there was any link between what Wim Hof does and NLP. And I stumbled across this story of these monks in, I think they're in Tibet, they're Buddhist monks, and it is a practice that they do as part of their meditation regime in the middle of winter. And what they will do is they will dunk some sheets in cold water, wrap themselves in sheets, and go and sit outside. And it's freezing in Tibet in the middle of winter. And they use 2 things, and what happens is the sheets start to steam because they're creating so much heat from their body. And after a while, the sheets are steaming so much and they're so hot that the sheets dry out. At which point, some other warmer monks come and take the sheets off and wrap them in new wet rags. So it doesn't sound that much fun, but it's an incredible practice that these monks have. So what are they doing to warm up their body so much, and how could we learn from that by combining biohacking and NLP? Well, they're doing 2 things. They're firstly using a breathing technique called Tumo, which I'm not an expert on breathing, but I'm fully down with breathing techniques. And the second thing they're doing is they are visualizing flames coming up their spine. I'm very interested. Would anyone here let me know, what do you do when you go into an ice bath or a cold shower? Is there anything that you think about in particular? I'd love to know. Charlotte, what do you think about? Is it breathing?
Yeah, breathing, but it's also recalling memories and playing with my senses, so as well doing
Oh,
NLP.
that was a perfect answer, because that's what I'm coming on to.
I go hear what I hear, so I listen into my heartbeats, then I go feel what I feel, then I see what I see, so I usually close my eyes, but I visualize something else, and I go back, hear what I hear, feel what I feel, see what I see.
Great. Anyone else? Anyone else thinking of anything interesting? Yeah.
I heard from Lean Taylor that you hum, like sharp breath in, and then low kind of hum vibrations on the way out. It's meant to be really good for like the back and neck.
Great. I see slight similarities with what might be going on with the sensate with that as well. Anyone else?
Just following on from that,
Yeah.
what I do in podcast is I come as well to activate my focus now. So there's that great kind of function of feedback from the brain and heart and stomach.
Great. Yeah. I'm very susceptible to cold weather and to feeling cold. And the technique I'm about to show you, I use at night when I get into bed in winter and my feet are cold. And it's a lovely sensation to feel the circulation start to go back into my toes. I'm not quite sure why I have such bad circulation. It might be something to do with the histamine intolerance that I can come on to. But what I think the monks are doing are a combination of two visualization techniques, or two NLP techniques. There's visualization and there is anchoring. Who's heard of Pavlov's dogs? Pavlov conducted an experiment when he had dogs, and he would ring a bell when he fed them every day. And after a while, he could ring the bell and they would salivate even if there was no food. And I'm not saying you're Pavlov's dogs at all, but we're going to do an experiment which is a little bit like Pavlov's dogs, and we're going to apply an external stimulus to feeling a certain way. We're going to do it with heat. So I'll show you how anchoring works. Perhaps you can think of a time now when you went to a very hot country, possibly the hottest holiday you've ever had. So think about that time now. And Skegness isn't going to work here. It's got to be somewhere a little bit hotter than that. And you can close your eyes or keep them open as you associate with what you could see at the time. See exactly what you saw. Put yourself in the picture. In fact, see what you saw. And make the colours bright and vivid and bold. And hear what you could hear at the time. And feel exactly how it felt to feel that sense of warmth. Feel how the temperature felt on your skin. Maybe a trickle of sweat. As you take your thumb and forefinger and start to squeeze it together. As you see what you saw at the time, make those colours big and bold. Hear what you heard and feel how warm, in fact how hot you felt. The temperature of the air on your skin and how you were sweating. Okay, and you can open your eyes if they're closed. What we've done there is an anchoring technique that works exactly the same way that any anchor works, and the same way that Pavlov's dogs and the bell worked. When you hear a song that reminds you of a holiday when you were 17, or you smell something, you smell fresh bread being cooked, or a certain perfume or scent, and it reminds you of somebody or something, that is an anchor. And what we've set up is an anchor there with your thumb and forefinger. Now, next time, a lot of you put your hands up when you said you're into cold exposure. Next time you get into the ice bath or the cold shower, squeeze your thumb and forefinger together. And at the conscious level, you might think, oh yeah, that bloke was talking about feeling hot and I set up an anchor. But your conscious mind can only think about 7 things at once, 7 plus or minus 1 or 2. Your unconscious mind takes care of all the other things, like breathing, that you don't have to think about on a day-to-day basis. And we've just bypassed the conscious mind to the unconscious mind, and you might just find it works quite well. If you're prone to sort of any uncomfortable emotion that you would like to instantly change and reframe, you can do that exercise again, perhaps with the other hand or another finger. Let's say you want to feel more confident or more relaxed in a certain situation. There's a new biohack and you're feeling a little bit anxious about it. You can set up an anchor for confidence and do exactly the same as we just did. So that's I think what the monks are using when they wrap the sheets around them, because they're using the visualization, but they've done it so many times that they've anchored the feeling of being warm and creating this extraordinary heat to the feeling of the sheets being wrapped around them, which is actually quite amazing, and the power of anchoring. And that's probably anchoring 101 for you. The reason I think biohacking and NLP works so well is because not everything works for everybody, and having a lot of friends here, I know how open-minded we are for trying all sorts of things. But it's hard to figure out what works and what doesn't. Sometimes you just know. For example, when I started taping my mouth at night, the first night I just knew. And Faith was doing it way before me, and I thought you were very weird, and I didn't want to do it, and I was a bit nervous about waking up choking in the middle of the night. And the first night that I did it, I just slept so much better. I felt sort of clearer in my nose, and I definitely slept deeper as well. And I sort of thought, I'm going to be doing that forever, I think. It's very romantic when we both go to bed with our mouths open, isn't it? No, darling. But there are other things that the effect is a little bit more subtle, which is why I've always been very interested in collecting metrics to figure out which biohacks actually work. And this is why I'm really passionate, why I wrote the book about energy as well, and combining NLP and biohacking. Who here has an Oura ring? Okay, so quite a lot of people wearing it. Who here wears a wearable of some description? Okay, quite a lot of us. Has the new Oura ring green light bothered anybody? Yeah. It's annoying, isn't it? I wrote a blog about it, and it's now the most clicked on page on my website. So I need to write more blogs about Oura rings. They've just brought out a Generation 3, which is great and does a lot more stuff, but we're all trying to sort of do the basic Biohacker 101 things like block blue light in the evening. In the middle of the night, you've got a fireworks show going on in front of your eye. So they need to sort that out. This is an Oura ring. So if you look around, there will be enough people wearing them. It measures your heart rate variability, temperature, breathing, respiratory rate, steps, sleep, all sorts of things like that. Soon it's going to be measuring more stuff, blood oxygen levels, I think, as well. There's a cycle track for women as well. It is really good, but sometimes I struggle to figure out how to apply it to my life. What changes have people, has anyone made significant changes to their life? I know I eat, funnily enough, less saturated fat now after using the Oura ring before, because when I have a big steak in an evening, my heart rate variability just absolutely plummets. And I think that's down to my genetics. Not everybody's like that, but perhaps some people can tolerate butter coffee not quite as well as others. It took me a few years of biohacking to work that out. But what I think is really important with metrics is collecting some subjective metrics as well. You get all the objective stuff around the Oura ring and the stats and everything else. But I like to collect stuff which is a bit more subjective. How are my energy levels on a particular day? How was my focus? How was my gut? Did I feel a bit inflamed? And then you can start applying it to things that you do during your day. And I talk all about this in the book. There's loads of different apps that you can try. I think I listed at least 15 different websites and apps that you can use to track your progress. And I started to do this and get some very interesting feedback. But at first, it wasn't particularly significant. For example, when I took magnesium, my energy levels were 2% up on a particular day, which is pretty good, but not groundbreaking, but pretty good. I tried every supplement, and magnesium was the one that made the most effect. I was like, 2%, all these supplements that I'm taking every day, it's like a chemist in our kitchen, and yet I'm only getting a 2% benefit. But as I continue to collect metrics, I do think these are important. I started to realise that one thing was showing up as boosting my energy levels by 20% every day. So 20%, I mean, that's a massive increase. If you could have 20% more energy, to be honest, that's probably more than a coffee. What do you think that one thing was that boosted over at least a couple of years of tracking my energy levels in this one thing? What do you think that thing was? Any ideas?
Sleep.
Sleep did have an impact, but not 20%. It wasn't cold. By the way, meditation and workout works really well. That's about 5% each. If I work out on a particular day, my energy levels are about 5% higher. And if I meditate on a particular day, my energy levels are 5% higher.
Fasting. Vitamin C?
It wasn't fasting. It wasn't vitamin C. It wasn't water.
Romance?
It was romance. It's a very delicate way of putting it as well. A little bit of romance. Faith, does that increase my energy levels by 20%? Yeah, I'll tell you what it was. It was when I switched off all the screens for at least 2 hours a day, my energy levels went up by 20%. I mean, what an incredible... I mean, how many people actually switch off their screens for 2 hours a day? Even knowing this information, I struggle to do that on a daily basis now. I think it must be because, firstly, I'm a lot more present when I'm not in front of a screen. And secondly, I'm doing all the sort of things that I like most in life, which don't involve screens. So that is hanging out with friends, cooking, sport, and romance. Definitely romance.
Are you specifically at night, or could it be any 2 hours in the day?
Oh, any 2 hour block in the day. Yeah. And sometimes it was more than 2 hours. But I noticed over the course of that 2 hours that I was just slowly coming back into the present. There was one other thing that made a massive difference. And that is when I didn't do this thing, it didn't increase my energy levels by 20%. But when I didn't do this thing, my energy levels decreased by around the same amount. Around 20%. And that was when, it's an odd thing to track, I realise, but I think it's important to collect metrics and whatever's important to you. And I tracked how much fun I was having on a particular day. And when I wasn't arranging any fun, when I wasn't doing something like going to a biohacking event, a meetup, or seeing friends, my energy levels decreased by 20% on a particular day. So I do think it's important to collect these metrics. And you know, these two books that I sell on histamine intolerance, one of the reasons that I got into presenting my podcast and into the whole wellness area is because I've always had a bit of a dodgy gut, and I've really struggled to work out what it is that could heal it. And I tried all sorts of different supplements, different diets. I've tried every different diet, and I couldn't really work out what was going on. And I'd always heard of this concept called histamine and histamine intolerance, but never really wanted to sort of get that involved. And then a few years ago, I decided to just sink into it and try the low histamine diet for 3 days and see if I felt better. Unfortunately, the low histamine diet involves cutting out some of the world's most delicious foods and drinks. Red wine, chocolate, avocados, papaya. It's not good. But after about 3 hours, I started to feel incredible. I mean, you're supposed to give it 3 days. I felt instantly way better. But as I know from metrics in the past, when I haven't actually measured stuff, I've tried plenty of things that I've felt awesome after 3 hours for, but it doesn't always last. And when I started to collect the metrics with histamine intolerance, it did last. And the reason that I'm so attuned to collecting data and how you feel and applying subjective data to things like the Oura ring and your stats is the fact that with histamine intolerance, everybody is different. And histamine intolerance is a whole different topic. I won't go into it too much, but if you want to come and chat afterwards or have a look at the book, that's there. But for instance, some people will be absolutely fine with coffee and other people will not be fine at all with coffee. So that's what you're dealing with histamine intolerance. Everybody is different. Some people will be fine with a tiny bit of mold in the house, probably not that many, but other people will hugely react. If I smell a strong detergent, I react so badly, but other people will be fine. And that's why I like to collect all these sort of metrics.
Just interrupting this podcast for one moment to remind you that my podcast partners are Bioptimizers, and they have a particularly good deal for you this month, and that is some free stuff. You'll get a free bottle of their best-selling enzyme supplement, Masszymes, so you can get that completely free. You can also get a free copy of a book, From Sick to Superhuman. You'll get another cookbook, which is called the Ultimate Carnivore Cookbook, and you'll get a free copy of Plant-Based Superfood Delights. So this bundle has a total value for $81, and they will send it to you for free and just a small shipping fee. That's pretty good, isn't it? I mean, Masszymes already is worth it, even if it's not free. A powerful, best-in-class enzyme supplement improves digestion, reduces gas and bloating, and just helps sort the gut out. And I'm such a big fan, and I'm always loaded up with enzymes when I go out. And it even provides relief from constipation, which I have less of an issue with, so I have less experience with, but I do know that Masszymes really helps in terms of digestion. You sort of want to take this supplement daily, even if you only eat organic, healthy food. I know a lot of people who listen to this podcast have a very on-point diet already, but Masszymes daily can just help you to digest and assimilate your food. So it's definitely worth trying for free, isn't it? Here's where you need to go. masszymes.com/zestology-free. masszymes.com/zestology-free. Go there, get your free Mass Zymes and the free books and the other free bits as well, worth $81. And let me know what you think of Mass Zymes as well. If you're in the UK, I'm not sure if this applies to you, but you can use the code Zestology10 on the UK Biooptimizers site to get 10% off. Go to masszymes.com/zestology-free. Back to the show.
Just a quick one on low histamine.
Yeah.
Where did we get the information what's low histamine and whatnot? It's literally, when I googled that stuff, some websites say you can't have avocados, some encourage you to have avocados, and it was just really bonkers to find the right information.
Yeah, it is. It's really hard, and I was shocked at what an undeveloped area it was, and I realised that I've been suffering with histamine intolerance longer than the phrase histamine intolerance has been in existence, I think. And because I run a small company and we publish various books and websites and podcasts, I said we basically appointed a load of nutritional experts and coaches and especially cookery experts to write these books. And it just took off so quickly. I mean, they are the second and third best-selling books in the world on histamine intolerance. And we didn't really know what we were doing when we brought them out either. Luckily, the people who wrote them did, and there's a very comprehensive list in there. But the issue with avocados is, for example, a ripe avocado might be high in histamine, but an unripe avocado might be low in histamine. The issue with fish is if it's frozen as soon as it's caught, it's low histamine, but if it's sat in the fridge for a couple of days, it's high histamine. So it's confusing. And then you start to realise that actually collecting these metrics and being aware of all this sort of biohacking stuff is important. I want to fast forward a couple of years to, it's wonderful to hear a baby in here. It's so nice.
Sorry.
No, don't worry, honestly. We fantasised about bringing our 2-year-old here today, and we're very glad that we didn't. No, it's fantastic. Fast forward a couple of years to our wedding night. Is this going to be too much information? We got married in between 2 lockdowns, so we got married in December 2020, and we just dodged the lockdown. We went down to Cornwall, the 3 of us and 2 witnesses, and we had a magical day in St Mawes in Cornwall. And a few drinks in the afternoon. Everything went right that day. Even Stan just went down without a whimper. We went back down with the baby monitor for a couple more drinks. And we got back to the room about 10:30. And this is too much information, isn't it? I went into the bathroom and something happened that if it wasn't for NLP and biohacking would have made me feel very anxious on my wedding night. I'm not going to crowdsource suggestions for this one. Don't let your mind go there. But what had happened was, you know what I'm going to say, right? You'll know as soon as I say it. I had a rash, didn't I? I had a rash on my hand and arm. It's not really the sort of thing you want on your wedding night. But because I'd been doing the biohacking, doing the NLP, and collected the metrics as well, I started to think it through. Why might it be? And 2 minutes on Google revealed the answer. And that is that in America, you're allowed to put nickel in wedding rings. And it was the first day that I'd ever worn a wedding ring. Unfortunately, it's pretty much the last day that I ever wore a wedding ring, because in the EU and in Britain, you're not allowed to put nickel in jewellery, because a lot of people react, and it can particularly provoke people with histamine symptoms. Amazing how it had an impact on me. I did try it again, didn't I, a couple of weeks later, and really quickly I started to react, and ended up having a nickel expert on my podcast and so on. But all of this thing I think is really important because there's something in NLP known as the law of requisite variety. The law of requisite variety. And that is, the more of the different things that you try, the more that you can optimize your performance. But the only way I think you can do that is by collecting data on what works. I want to do a couple more techniques before we go and just look at how we could apply some of this stuff. One of the areas you could look at using NLP in your day-to-day life is in your language, how you talk to yourself and how you talk to other people. Is there anyone here who feels that every once in a while you've got a slightly critical self-voice? that is holding you back at all? Okay, so a real chuckle of recognition. I mean, it's definitely me, but it's interesting to hear. Yeah, because the neuro-linguistic part of programming is so helpful. And I think when it comes to biohacking, I think this stuff is particularly important. You know, there's a whole chapter on cold in the book, as I said, but there's lots of different stuff that I am, by nature, not a particularly adventurous person, and I force myself to be more adventurous because of that. And it is because of that internal voice. So I look at some of the different linguistic techniques that we can use on ourselves and other people. And if you go back to when I was working in radio, one of the things that was quite powerful was the language that I used. I tried to connect with the senses. When Charlene was talking about what she thought about when she was in the ice bath, she was connecting with with the information that her senses were giving her. And the senses are how we make sense of the world, and often we tend to bypass them. You can be much more descriptive by using sensory language that appeals to especially the way things look, sound, or feel, for example, or taste. For example, if you tell someone about this meetup today and you tell them about the butter coffee that you've been drinking, you could say it was delicious. And they'll get a sense that you liked it, but they won't really get a sense of what the coffee was like. But you could say it had a velvety texture or a rich aroma, and they get much more of an idea of what the coffee was like in terms of the taste, the kinesthetic sense, and also the olfactory sense of smell. So you can really start to appeal to people with senses, and you can start to improve your own self-talk as well. And if you think about your own internal voice, think about a time when you were a little bit anxious or critical, or perhaps your internal voice wasn't serving you well, you didn't feel particularly at ease. If you think about that time now, you can either keep your eyes open or you can close them. Think about that voice and a particular time if you want now, and try and figure out where it is. If it had a location, that voice, would it be in front of you? Would it be behind you? Would it be way off in the distance? Would it be sort of just in the atmosphere? As you think about that voice, perhaps you can start to change the modalities of how it sounds. Make it a little bit quieter. Imagine you've got a volume knob and just turn the volume down a little bit and move it away into the distance. Shrink it to the size of a postage stamp and then turn the volume down so it's very quiet, but you can still hear it, but it's just different. This is what NLP does. And as you continue to think about that voice way off in the distance, much quieter, you could maybe give it a different sound. You could make it very high-pitched or give it the sound of a cartoon character. And how does it sound now, that voice telling you you can't go into a cryotherapy chamber? It sort of diminishes in its power. You can open your eyes if you've been doing that. This is sort of the way that we experience the world through senses is how phobias occur, actually. Because often we tend to disassociate from the feelings which are great. We tend to associate with the feelings which aren't so great, and that can be really unhelpful. So I've worked with literally hundreds of people with NLP and phobias of flying, lifts. I worked with someone who had a phobia of eggs. Yeah, literally eggs. And she was able to hold an egg after we finished because she was associating. She'd had a time, or you go on a plane, you have a time when it's like a particularly bad journey and you associate with that time, but you don't associate with all the other times when you actually felt good. So what we're doing there is we're associating with something that's not particularly positive for you and changing the modalities of how it sounds. And you can also change the way it looks and feels and so on. That's something that you might want to do with your internal voice, and also focus on your language as well. You might want to ask some either-or questions of your toddler if you have one, or your partner. Some people will say, is NLP and thinking about your communication in this way manipulative? Is that something that's occurred to anybody during this talk? Because I personally think that all communication is manipulative to a certain extent. When you're trying to persuade someone of your point, if you've got a better way to make your point, you will use those skills. I think it's more important to have great skills and always use your powers for good, which is what they tell us when we do the NLP training. And you can make no mistake, every large company in the world has some sort of element of NLP in what they do. They'll have NLP experts there. And you just hope that the likes of Facebook and Google are using their power for good. I'm not sure about that. Yeah. The last thing I'd like you to think about is looped stories. When you think about a comedian, they will start to loop the same themes again and again in their work. And loop story is a really powerful way of getting your point across. You tell a metaphor, you tell a story, and then at the end, you've got your point. And so when I told you the story about the monks or about my experience in radio, that sort of allows you to relax. When someone says, I'm going to tell you a story, you feel like you're going to start to relax a little bit, and you can ease into it. And then the point's at the end of it. It's much easier to get a point if you use some looped stories. Comedians do this so well, and I absolutely... Who was the comedian we were watching on Netflix the other night?
Ali Wong.
Ali Wong. Has anyone seen Ali Wong? Yeah. Oh, absolutely brilliant, especially if you're a parent. And she was looping stories really well, all the way through, going back to bits. And that's what I've tried to do today in terms of when I talked about my radio career and the wedding and the monks and all the rest of it, sort of thing. You can use NLP to improve your biohacking and mindset for sure. And I'd love to chat to you more if you want to after this. If there's any questions, I'm very happy to answer them. If you want my book on NLP and biohacking, it's there, or you can buy it on Amazon. And there's a directory at the back of the book with every biohack that's ever worked for me. So that's a nice shortcut, a nice way in to biohacking. These books on histamine intolerance are definitely worth a look as well. They're published by my company. And keep trying to persuade Tim to write a book through my company as well. So that's the next step, I think. Also on my site, TonyWrighton.com, there's a little bit more information about NLP, and I do coaching with clients as well. We use NLP. I'm trained in EFT, which is tapping as well, which is incredibly powerful. I haven't really even gone into, but that's made a huge difference to my life. I'm a mind factor accredited coach, and there's a load of biohacking in there as well when I work with private clients. For now, though, thank you very much for listening to me whittering on for half an hour, 45 minutes or so, and thank you. If anyone's got a question, you're welcome to either ask it now.
Okay, let's do a few questions now, because we're just working on the giveaway.
Oh yeah, great, yeah, perfect. So I see a hand up there, yeah.
What are your thoughts on popping antihistamines as a preventative measure? Is it a good biohack or can it be like
On antihistamines?
Yeah, like fentanyl or
There is some stuff in the book on it. I take antihistamines in spring during hay fever season only. And I also took them when I had COVID, actually. But I'm certainly not a nutritionist, and I wouldn't be recommending any course of action. There is some evidence to say that if you take antihistamines all the time, their power wears off and your ability to deal with histamine naturally wanes, which is why I tend to use natural antihistamines, lots of vitamin C, quercetin, magnesium. There's a brilliant company called Seeking Health who make Histamine Block Plus. You've been taking Natur DAO as well, which is a natural form of antihistamine, a natural form of DAO, which helps you process the histamine in your body, and that's great as well, isn't it? It's made a big difference to you, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there you go. Yeah.
When you were saying about measuring your energy levels, how are you doing that?
Okay. Yeah. There's a load of different ways you can do it. There are apps such as Dailyo or My Symptoms, and you can track it that way. I tend to use good old-fashioned spreadsheets because I'm a bit of a geek, and I use Google Forms. So there's a sort of hack actually where you can set any homepage, any page on the internet, you can actually show up on your iPhone homepage, and it looks like an app, but it just takes you through to a web page. So I'll click on that in the evening. It's got a load of questions. So how is your energy out of 10 today? How is your gut? How is your focus? And then I'm tracking other things like, did I meditate? Did I work out? Did I take L-tyrosine? Whatever it might be. And then start to look at correlations between the two. Dailyo is quite a good one to get started. It's a great frustration that there's no perfect app out there. And in fact, about 5 years ago, Tim and I tried to bring out an app on it, didn't we? And we quickly realised that we'd need Google levels of funding if we were going to make it work. I'd still love to do it, but it's complicated. Yeah.
What NLP technique in particular had the biggest impact on your life?
I think probably sort of some of the ones that I went through. The hypnosis is a big one, and hypnosis and meditation are quite similar. But when I got the job at Sky, so I've been a Sky presenter for the last 15 years, and I left last June. And when I went for my Sky Sports interview, I thought I was going to be the only one there for a screen test, and there were 60 other people. And I prepared a lot, and I used a lot of NLP. I used a lot of goal setting and outcomes. I used a lot of visualization. And then I used that anchoring technique in the 1 minute before I started my screen test. And I was so sort of hyped up because I wanted the job so badly that actually I think it just calmed me down enough to make a big difference. So anchoring is a really simple one, but there's lots of other things involved in there as well. You know, we were connecting with the senses. I was sneaking in a subtle little bit of hypnotic language at the same time, and they all sort of merge into them. Yeah. Yeah.
More specific to histamine. So I've struggled with histamine intolerance. Also learned about it. It's always been in my life.
Yeah.
And especially when I got over COVID.
Yeah.
I was in and out of me with it. It was awful to the point where I was like swollen like tomatoes. I just couldn't see skin. It was just all blended. And they kept putting me on steroids and stuff like this. No one knew what histamine was, and the doctors recognised it. It took ages to found the website. It's really such a difference to me. But I've been on antihistamine for quite a while, and I've been doing a very low histamine diet. And then I started introducing it back in the last few weeks, and unfortunately the histamine reaction has come back. I know that you were exploring at some points whether histamine can be fully cured or whether it's always going to be present. And I know that it's probably different for certain people, but have you had any more kind of discoveries on whether you found that you're cured from it, or whether it's possible?
God, I'm so sorry. Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare again. And I always feel very grateful that whilst it's had a significant impact on my life, I don't think I've ever ended up in A&E because of my histamine issues, and mine mostly came in the gut. And I do think with histamine intolerance, you were asking whether I think it can be cured, or can I get over it? Do you know, I've interviewed lots of experts on my podcast. I interviewed Janice Janeja, who said, I'll always eat no histamine, and she's one of the top experts in the world. And I sort of feel the same thing. Unfortunately, I just avoid red wine now because I know it doesn't work. I can tolerate a bit of tequila and vodka. I'm not totally boring, but the red wine is out, and so is the white wine. Prosecco seems to be right.
How do you find dry farm wines for that?
Not great.
Really?
No. No, not the low histamine wine, but dry farm wines do biodynamic wine, which is slightly different.
That works for me.
Does it? Great. And that's the crazy thing about histamine intolerance. Everybody is different. And the other thing is working with a practitioner who understands. And actually, there's what's your name? Nicole. And are you a nutritionist?
Nutritional therapist, yeah.
Nicole, I've possibly just got you 10 new clients. Nicole is a nutritional therapist. Oh, are they good? Okay. Where are the other nutritional therapists?
So there's Jade and Gash.
I was just going to mention our nutritional therapist.
Fantastic.
And I was just going to mention that you have to understand how you're metabolizing your histamine. There are two ways, kind of DOL, COMT is to do with methylation as well. So it's you can do that testing to understand what's going on in your body. You need to understand the processes downstream, and if you can work with that, then you might be able to kind of long-term bring the histamine foods back in. But it's not going to, taking histamine out and just leaving it and then putting it back in isn't going to do anything because you haven't fixed the mechanism that's causing the problem in the first place.
And how fantastic that we have nutritional experts here who appreciate histamine. That is just so wonderfully refreshing. And I'm working with a practitioner as well. I'm sort of really excited by some of the things that we're trying out. For instance, the supplement that Tim's taking at the moment before food doesn't work for me. So there's a different thing going on with histamine.
Yeah.
But anyway, great.
Seeking health supplement is
Seeking health histamine supplements are great. Okay, any more? Hi.
Hi.
Yeah.
I love what you're saying about measuring stuff. And where I am in terms of measuring my energy is I was doing like a basic kind of 1 to 10. This time I'm doing a 7 this day. I'm doing a 6 that day. But my interpretations might be sort of slightly different day to day. How did you kind of get to the specific I've improved my energy by 20% in this particular domain. Like, how did you come to that particular figure?
Oh, yeah, I think sort of, I agree, it's very subjective. Was my energy a 7 out of 10 or a 6? It's not something that you've got the Oura Ring stats to prove it. You're just plucking a figure out of thin air, but hopefully it's close to right. But then over a period of 700 days, then when you start to look at, hopefully you're going to get it right most of the time. And then you start to look at the correlations and the links between, oh yeah, really, when on the days that I do switch off my phone and I do get away from screens, the energy is such a big leap that there must be something going on there. You know, the 2% with magnesium probably isn't that much, but I mean, I just did some fairly basic sums on a spreadsheet, and that's what it came up with. But I agree, it's subjective, and there's no better way of doing it than that. Obviously, there's a role for all sorts of different tests that you can do as well, but yeah, subjective data and then doing the analysis. I just wish there was an app that did it all for us. My Symptoms does sort of do it as well, but I don't know if that's been updated for a while.
How was it possible to feel 2% difference in these very subjective parameters?
Yeah, exactly. So on a particular day, I'm only giving myself a mark out of 10 on my energy levels. But after 700 days, I'm looking at the percentage of all my energy levels. So like my average energy level is 7.2 out of 10. But then when I take magnesium, it's 7.4 out of 10, if you see what I mean. So that's how I'm analysing the data. I'm not saying, I took magnesium today, I feel 0.2% better. I'm doing the analysis and then that's what I'm coming up with.
Where were you tracking it on, like Excel sheet or?
Yeah, Google Forms, Google Sheets. Okay. I actually had to hire someone on Upwork to analyse the results for me at first. But now, and as I say in the book, I put loads of different places that you can track it. Dailyo is a pretty good one that you can track all sorts of things, especially around mood. If you're someone who suffers a lot with fluctuations with mood, Dailyo is excellent. And then you can put in anything that you want subjectively, and it'll say, oh, on the days that you work out, your mood is X% better, which is quite good. That's free as well.
One more question.
Yeah, one more question. Anyone else? Yes.
I was looking at urine therapies, and would you be willing to experiment with drinking urine as an antihistamine? Because I believe there's no
Have I heard of urine therapy, and would I be willing to experiment with drinking my own urine as an antihistamine? Hang on, I just need my anchor here. It's still a no. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed.